The ballroom glittered beneath the chandeliers, but behind the sparkle hid a darker truth. Among polished shoes and diamond smiles, one man moved silently, unseen, carrying the weight of shadows. His story wasn't written on invitations or whispered in champagne bubbles. It lived in scars no one bothered to notice, in hands that once held the world. And tonight, fate would demand he reveal what no one expected. Have you ever wondered how quickly arrogance can crumble into shame, or how a single forgotten soul can rise from invisibility and command the room? The answers lie in the clash between cruelty and dignity, pride and redemption. This is not merely a tale of music, it is a story of second chances. Stay close, because what begins as humiliation will turn into legend. Behind the glitter, behind the power, there is always something hidden, secrets waiting to be forced into the light. And when they surface, they change not only the man who carries them, they transform everyone who dares to witness the truth. Tonight, you are not just an observer. You are part of the revelation. The hotel glittered like a crown at dusk, all glass and light and quiet power. Crystal chandeliers sighed above a sea of tuxedos and silk gowns. A string quartet threaded soft notes through the hum of small talk. Waiters moved like clockwork, silver trays floating on steady hands. It felt like the night had dressed itself for a secret it could not hold back. Money spoke without a word, flashing in diamonds and easy laughter. Old friends pretended to be surprised, then traded quick favors with a wink. Names carried weight, and people leaned in to catch them mid-air. Even the marbles seemed to listen, polished within an inch of a mirror. Everyone believed they were part of the story, or at least near its center. Robert worked the floor with a quiet grace that did not ask to be seen. His cart rolled softly, wheels whispering over plush carpet. He kept his eyes steady, careful with every glass and napkin. Oh, he knew the rhythm of rooms like this, no doubt about it. One misstep, and the whole illusion could crack like thin ice. He noticed things others missed, the way a candle trembled near a draught. He spotted a teardrop of wine along a table edge and caught it fast. He straightened a chair as if setting a spine back in place. He smoothed a wrinkle that might have tripped a careless heel. It was quiet work, but it held the room together like a hidden stitch. Across the ballroom stood a grand piano, black as a still lake. Its lid gleamed under the lights, a promise waiting to be tested. The bench sat a hair off center, and Robert nudged it true. He did not touch the keys, not even once, not yet. Still, his gaze lingered for a breath that felt a little too long. The quartet paused, tuning with small, careful sighs. Glasses clinked in a gentle chorus that almost found a beat. Robert caught that beat and matched it without thinking. He moved left as the servers flowed right, neat as a dance. If anyone looked closely, they might have seen the steps. The elite treated the staff like scenery, there, but not quite there. Some guests smiled past him as if he were a ghost in a fine suit. A few muttered a thanks that did not bother to reach their eyes. No kidding. Invisibility came easy in rooms paid for with pride. Robert let it roll off, steady as a stone in a moving stream. A manager drifted by with a measured nod that meant everything and nothing. Robert read the nod and fixed a small spill near the far pillar. He lifted a fallen program and laid it square for the usher. He set a stray flute on a tray before it could wobble into trouble. Little things, sure, but little things decide where nights turn. On the balcony, a pair of donors whispered about an arrival. A name floated down, soft and sharp at the same time. People straightened their jackets as if to greet a camera. The quartet lifted their bows and held that breath again. Something was about to shift, and the room could feel it. The doors at the top of the stairs eased open with a hush. Light from the corridor poured in like a sudden invitation. Heads turned in a ripple that moved faster than the music. Robert paused near the piano, eyes calm, heart careful. He sensed trouble and promise walking toward the same spotlight. The staircase became a stage the moment she appeared. Karen stepped into the light with diamonds that caught every breath. Her gown shimmered like liquid fire, stitched in arrogance and silk. The crowd tilted toward her without meaning to, drawn like moths. Every step echoed louder than the music dared to play. She moved as if the world belonged to her alone, heads bowed, not out of respect but habit, carved from fear. Whispers followed her name like perfume, heavy and sweet. Her smile was calculated, a blade hidden under velvet. She knew she was the story, and she savored it. Karen let her gaze drift across the room, pausing here and there. She admired herself in the mirrored walls more than the guests. To her, everyone else looked like furniture dressed in fine suits. Servants didn't even count. They were shadows filling gaps. She had built her life on being untouchable, and it showed. When her eyes swept across Robert, she didn't see him at all. To her, he was part of the carpet, useful, but invisible. She walked past, the edge of her gown nearly brushing him. The perfume lingered, sharp, expensive, almost cruel in its richness. Robert lowered his head, but not out of shame, only patience. A guest raised a glass and praised her fortune aloud. She laughed with a tilt of her chin, as if it were owed. Every word out of her mouth carried the weight of dismissal, polite on the surface, but empty as crystal filled with air. People nodded anyway, desperate to stand close to her glow. The manager hurried forward, offering her a polished compliment. She accepted without listening, already reaching for champagne. The waiter's hand trembled as he served, afraid to falter. Karen didn't notice. She never did. She lived in a cage of mirrors, each one reflecting only herself. Around her, the guests leaned in, waiting for drama to spark. Her presence promised it, like thunder pressing against the sky. Every gesture carried the chance of spectacle, sweet or sour. Karen fed on that hunger, tossing scraps of attention at will. The room revolved around her orbit, and she knew it. Robert caught the smallest flinch in the waiter's hand. He steadied the tray just enough to save the glass. Karen never saw the rescue. She only tasted the sip. To her, the night was flawless, untouched by struggle, but Robert had already felt the crack beneath the polish. And as the music swelled, the night seemed to hold its breath. Karen raised her glass, her smile sharp and hollow. Eyes followed her, some in awe, others in envy. Robert, silent at the piano's side, felt a shadow of unease. Something told him her shine was about to slip. The champagne sparkled as it left the bottle, fizzing with promise. Karen tilted her glass with careless grace, laughter still on her lips. She lifted it high, the golden liquid catching the chandelier's fire. But the angle was wrong, and the glass slipped just slightly. A shimmering arc spilled down the front of her gown. Gasps fluttered through the ballroom like startled birds. Karen froze, staring at the stain spreading across silk worth a fortune. Her perfect smile cracked into fury, sharp and sudden. She turned with a snap, eyes locking on Robert. It was easier to blame the invisible than admit a mistake. "You clumsy fool," she hissed, loud enough for all to hear. The accusation stung like a whip in the air. Robert's hands, steady as stone, rested on his cart. He hadn't touched her glass, not even close. Yet silence around them confirmed the guilty role she assigned. Laughter rose, cruel and cutting, from the tables nearby. Men smirked behind hands. Women whispered like daggers. To them, Robert's humiliation was entertainment dressed in luxury. He stood still, calm as a statue beneath the ridicule, but his eyes carried a quiet fire no one noticed yet. Karen dabbed the stain with a napkin, her fury theatrical. She waved Robert away as though brushing dust from her shoulder. The crowd chuckled, delighting in the cruel imbalance. Whispers of pathetic and worthless threaded between the notes of music. Robert's heart clenched, but he refused to bow his head. The pianist at the corner played on, trying to bury the tension. But each note only sharpened the edges of the scene. Karen's arrogance fed on the laughter as if she'd won. The elite drank in the moment like fine wine. No one expected it to turn against them so soon. Robert reached for a stray glass, his movement steady. His silence felt heavier than words, his stillness deliberate. The room mistook it for defeat, but it was restraint. He carried himself with the dignity of someone who had seen worse. Something unseen whispered that this humiliation would not last. Karen tossed the stained napkin onto Robert's cart. The gesture dripped with disdain, final and absolute. She looked to the crowd, basking in their approval. But her victory was shallow, as fragile as spun glass. The air thickened with tension no one could name. and as she turned back to her admirers, Robert's eyes lingered on the piano. The instrument gleamed, waiting, almost alive under the lights. His silence became a question, his stillness a challenge. The laughter carried on, unaware of the storm about to rise. The night had not chosen its hero yet, but it would soon. The laughter had not yet faded when Karen's eyes flashed with mischief. She leaned against the piano, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Since you seem so eager to stand there," she said, her voice cutting, "why don't you give us all a show?" The room fell into a hush that tasted of anticipation. Gasps broke into small waves as her challenge sank in. She pointed at the bench with a mocking elegance. "If he plays better than our guest pianist, I shall marry him." The words dripped with venom disguised as jest. The crowd erupted, some in shock, most in glee. Whispers raced from table to table, quick as sparks on dry wood. They spoke of spectacle, of humiliation staged in gold. Karen thrived on the attention, feeding the fire she had lit. Her bet was outrageous, but outrage was her favorite currency. The audience leaned closer, hungry for the fall. Robert did not flinch, though the weight pressed heavy. He stood by the piano, as if carved from the same wood, eyes turned toward him, waiting for refusal, for collapse. The pianist smirked, already tasting his easy triumph, but Robert's silence stretched, daring the night itself to move. Karen raised her glass again, her laugh sharp and hollow. "To witness such tragedy would be worth a toast," she declared. The crowd chuckled, ready to watch him stumble and break. They wanted a spectacle, something to tell in whispers tomorrow. Robert's hands rested lightly on the piano's edge, steady as stone. The pianist adjusted his cufflinks, his arrogance clear. To him, Robert was no opponent, only prey. The bet was cruel, but cruelty was sweet to this crowd. They wanted Robert's failure wrapped in music and shame. Every second ticked louder, pressing for his answer. Robert lifted his gaze, his eyes calm, his breath measured. He had seen laughter like this before, sharp as knives. He had felt weight heavier than Karen's sneer. The challenge burned, but not with fear. It flickered with something deeper, something long buried. The air thickened as the crowd leaned in further. They wanted the fall, the crack, the humiliation. Karen's smile widened, certain of her triumph. Her eyes sparkled with the cruelty of someone untouchable. But Robert's silence carried a shadow she did not see. At last he spoke, his voice low but firm. "If that is the wager," he said, "then I accept." The words cut through the room like glass breaking. The laughter faltered, turning into stunned silence. Something in the night had just shifted. Karen blinked, caught off guard by his courage. The pianist stiffened, his smirk cracking at the edges. The audience gasped, no longer sure of the ending. The piano seemed to breathe, waiting for the first touch, and Robert's fingers hovered near the keys, ready to awaken it. The room held its breath as Robert sat at the bench. The polished keys stretched before him like a field of white fire. He rested his hands lightly, almost reverently, as if greeting an old friend. For a moment, silence pressed so hard it nearly broke. Then his fingers fell, and the first note soared like truth unveiled. It wasn't just sound, it was memory, set free. The melody rose with a depth no one expected from a janitor. Soft at first, then stronger, like a river shaking off its stones. Each note carried pain, longing, and a tenderness that pierced the crowd. The laughter that once filled the air died without a fight. Karen's smile faltered as the music wound around her heart. Her glass trembled, though she tried to mask it with a sip. The pianist stiffened, his arrogance bleeding into unease. What poured from Robert's hands was not performance, but confession, and no one in the room could look away. The chandeliers seemed to lean closer, light trembling with the rhythm. Guests who moments ago mocked now sat wide-eyed and silent. A melody of sorrow swelled into one of triumph, raw and real. Robert's face was calm, but his eyes shone with something buried. The piano sang like it had been waiting only for him. The critic in the corner straightened, his breath caught. He recognized technique, yes, but more than that, soul. The phrasing, the control, the storm inside each crescendo, undeniable. This wasn't the clumsy attempt of a servant, this was mastery, honed by years and scarred by life. The crowd leaned forward, forgetting their wine, their whispers. The room itself seemed to pulse with the notes he conjured, every phrase cut through arrogance and stitched humility in its place. Karen's eyes widened, her grip on superiority slipping. The bet no longer felt like a game, but a reckoning. Robert shifted into a piece that bled into pure improvisation. No sheet music guided him, only instinct and memory. His fingers flew, light and shadow, racing across the keys. Gasps rose when dissonance turned to harmony, pain into beauty. The ballroom was no longer a stage, it was a sanctuary. Tears welled in eyes that hadn't known sorrow in years. One guest pressed a hand to her mouth, unable to hide it. A man who had laughed loudest now stared silent and still. The pianist lowered his gaze, defeated before the end, and Robert kept playing, weaving a story without words. When the final chord rang out, it lingered in the air. Not a single sound followed. Even breath seemed reluctant. Robert lifted his hand slowly, letting the silence speak. Then came the applause, crashing like thunder after lightning. But deep down, the night had already been changed forever. The silence shattered under the weight of thunderous applause. Hands clapped together in waves, echoing through marble and glass. Guests rose to their feet, their earlier cruelty erased by awe. They cheered not just for the music, but for the man reborn at the piano. The ballroom no longer mocked him, it bowed to him. Karen forced a smile, brittle as thin ice on a lake. She looked around, realizing admiration had shifted away from her glow. Every gaze that once worshipped her now burned toward Robert. Her laughter had turned hollow, swallowed by the sound of his triumph. The stage she had built for his ruin crowned him instead. The critic stepped forward, adjusting his glasses with trembling hands. His voice cut through the ovation with weight and certainty. "This man is not merely skilled," he declared. "He is extraordinary." The words hung like gospel in the air, undeniable and final. Even the pianist lowered his eyes, conceding defeat without protest. Guests who once sneered now whispered with reverence. They spoke of genius, of prodigy, of a story too incredible to ignore. Men who had laughed at his uniform now reached to shake his hand. Women dabbed at their eyes, moved in ways they couldn't explain. The tide had turned, and Robert stood in its swell. Robert bowed his head slightly, humility carved into every gesture. He did not bask in the applause, though it roared for him. His calm presence only deepened the crowd's respect. Here was no arrogant showman, only a man who had bled into the keys, and that honesty made the ovation all the louder. Karen's glass slipped slightly in her hand, though she caught it. She searched for allies in the crowd, but found only indifference. Her spotlight had dimmed, replaced by the glow around Robert. For the first time in years, she felt small among her own, and she hated how fragile power suddenly seemed. The critic approached Robert, his eyes sharp but warm. "You carry the soul of music itself," he said, almost reverently. "Where have you hidden all these years?" The crowd leaned closer, craving the answer to that mystery, but Robert only offered a faint, knowing smile. The applause stretched on, relentless, demanding more. Some shouted for another piece, begging the music not to end. The pianist, who had smirked now, sat forgotten in the corner. Robert's silence held more gravity than the man's entire career. The contrast cut deep, and the crowd saw it plainly. Karen clenched her jaw, trying to mask the storm inside. This was not how the night was meant to unfold. Her plan of mockery had crowned him instead. She had written tragedy, but birthed legend, and every cheer for Robert carved her pride to pieces. As the ovation rolled like an endless tide, Robert stayed steady. He looked beyond the clapping hands, beyond the glittering gowns. His gaze carried the weight of memory, of scars hidden in silence. The world saw a hero rise, but he still felt the shadow of loss. And soon, that shadow would be revealed. The applause still echoed when whispers of curiosity filled the room. Who was this man, hidden behind a uniform of servitude? The critic leaned closer, his sharp eyes glinting with recognition. "I've seen those hands before," he murmured to no one in particular. A murmur of anticipation rippled through the guests. A name surfaced like a ghost rising from deep water. The conservatory. He was the prodigy, someone whispered. Eyes widened as the pieces began to fall into place. Not a janitor, not a shadow. He had once been promise itself. The air grew heavier with revelation, pressing in on every ear. Karen stiffened, her hand tightening around her glass. She had wanted a spectacle, but not this kind. The thought of elevating him beyond her control burned inside. The crowd, however, was hungry for more of the truth. They leaned toward Robert, desperate for his story. Robert's silence spoke louder than words, but the critic pressed on. He was the one they called a genius before his time. Played Mozart at 8, composed by 11, headlined at 15. But then, nothing. He vanished from the world of music. The words cut the air like a blade sharpened on mystery. Faces turned, whispers spread, and admiration grew. To fall from such heights and stand again, it thrilled them. Robert shifted slightly, his expression calm, yet burdened. He neither confirmed nor denied, but his eyes betrayed memory. Pain flickered there, too raw to hide beneath composure. A guest asked softly, "Why would he leave all that behind?" The critic shook his head, offering only fragments of rumor. Debt, tragedy, whispers of a broken spirit. No answer ever satisfied, for the truth was too heavy, and yet the silence begged for someone to break it. The pianist, still forgotten, looked at Robert with new eyes. What he had dismissed as luck now burned with legitimacy. He saw not just skill, but legacy rising before him. The humiliation reversed, leaving him in the ashes, and the crowd no longer cared for his name. Karen's smirk had vanished, replaced by something else. Was it fear? Was it envy? Or was it the weight of shame? She could not mock a man who once commanded the world. The story had turned against her, and she knew it. Yet still, she hoped the truth might unravel him. The room felt different now, charged with respect and awe. Every glance at Robert carried both admiration and sorrow. They longed to understand the man who had returned by chance. The janitor's uniform no longer fit in their eyes. What they saw was a fallen star standing in their midst. Robert lowered his gaze, his hand still resting on the keys. For a moment it seemed he might finally speak, but the words died, swallowed by the weight of memory. His silence told them enough. It was a silence carved by loss, and soon another voice would reveal what he would not. From the shadows near the staircase, Amelia stepped forward. Her uniform marked her as the head housekeeper, yet her eyes carried weight. She looked at Robert with a tenderness that stilled the noise, and when she spoke, the ballroom leaned in as though before a sermon. Her words carried the truth Robert himself could not bear to share. He was more than a prodigy, she said softly. He was a son who buried both parents in the same year. Gasps flickered through the crowd like sparks in dry grass. They left him not just with grief, but with debts too heavy to outrun. Every whisper hushed, guilt creeping into once arrogant faces. Amelia's voice trembled, though her stance remained steady. He gave up the stage to keep a roof over his sister's head. He traded concert halls for cleaning halls, pianos for silence. Every day he carried sorrow no one ever saw, yet even then he worked with dignity, never bitterness. Karen's lips parted, her mockery crushed by the weight of truth. She had mocked not a failure, but a man who chose sacrifice. The crowd shifted, shame thick in the air. Their laughter from earlier now sounded like cruelty carved in stone. Robert, silent, bowed his head. As Amelia spoke for him, the critic wiped his glasses, stunned by the revelation. "Talent like his does not simply vanish," he whispered. "But now we see why the world lost him." The words ached with reverence and regret alike. The room was no longer laughing. It was grieving with him. Amelia's eyes glistened, though she kept her tone firm. "He never stopped being an artist. He simply bore too much pain. But tonight, you all saw the fire he once carried. It never died. It only slept beneath sorrow." Her words fell heavy, each syllable a dagger wrapped in mercy. The guests sat in silence, stripped of arrogance. Even the pianist lowered his head, unable to look at Robert. What once had been ridicule had turned to reverence. The story had shifted again, binding everyone to his pain. They felt complicit in a cruelty they could no longer deny. Robert lifted his gaze, meeting Amelia's eyes with gratitude. Her truth hurt, yet it set him free. He did not need to speak. Her voice was enough. The crowd now saw not just a janitor or a prodigy. They saw a man carved by loss, still unbroken. Karen's chest tightened, though she tried to steady her hand. Her arrogance wavered, chipped by the storm of revelation. She had wanted humiliation but received transformation instead. And now the bet hung heavier than gold or diamonds. The world demanded her response, and she could not hide forever. The music still lingered in the air, though no keys moved. It was the melody of pain turned into beauty. The ballroom itself seemed different, charged with humility. The audience sat on the edge, waiting for what came next. The silence was not empty. It was a bridge to another trial. Karen stood frozen, her glass trembling, though her smile tried to hold. The wager she had thrown so carelessly now weighed like iron chains. Marry a man she had mocked before the eyes of the world. Her arrogance battled the humiliation clawing at her pride. Every gaze in the ballroom pressed against her like judgment. Whispers swelled, curious, hungry, almost merciless. They spoke of honor, of promises not to be broken. The cruel game she created had turned into her prison. The crowd demanded an answer, their eyes sharp with expectation. Karen's polished mask cracked under the strain of their stares. Her heart raced. Though she tried to lift her chin higher, she wanted to laugh, to dismiss it all as a joke. But the silence around her was too heavy for escape. The critics' glare alone bound her to the bet. The moment demanded she honor her own cruelty. Robert remained calm, though the room burned with tension. He had not asked for the wager, yet he carried it with dignity. His silence only deepened her torment, for it gave nothing away. Was he waiting to claim victory or to show mercy? The question gnawed at Karen, louder than the crowd's whispers. Some guests muttered about contracts, honor, reputation. Others smirked, eager to see the proud heiress cornered. Her reputation glittered like glass, and it now threatened to shatter. To back down would be weakness. To follow through would be ruin. Either path tasted of humiliation she had never known. The pianist smirked from the corner, though no one looked his way. Karen's fury boiled, but it turned inward now. For the first time, she was not untouchable. She was prey. The power she wielded had become a blade against her, and the crowd sharpened it with every glance. A wave of laughter had once been her ally, but not tonight. Now it lurked, waiting to erupt against her pride. The very people she ruled with disdain longed for her downfall. Her throne of arrogance had turned to fragile glass. She could hear it crack with every heartbeat. Karen glanced at Robert, hoping for release, but his eyes, calm and unreadable, gave her none. He was the mirror she could not bend to her will. He reflected her cruelty back to her, quietly, painfully, and in that reflection she saw the hollowness of herself. The weight of her own words crushed her shoulders. She wanted to escape the cage she had built, yet could not. The bet was no longer entertainment, it was a sentence. Her power had turned to dust in her hands, and still the crowd waited for her decision. Karen's lips parted, but no words came. The silence stretched like a blade across the room. Her arrogance faltered, her pride trembling on the edge of collapse. She had cornered herself before the entire world, and the next move would define her forever. Robert finally rose from the bench, the echoes of music still clinging to him. The crowd held its breath, waiting for him to claim his victory. Every eye was locked on him, every whisper silenced by expectation. Karen braced herself, fearing the words she thought would come. But his voice, when it broke the silence, was calm and steady. "I don't want your hand in marriage," he said softly. Gasps swept through the ballroom, sharp as shattered glass. Karen's eyes widened, disbelief tightening her chest. She had prepared for mockery, for a demand she couldn't bear. Instead, Robert's mercy cut deeper than cruelty ever could. He let the pause stretch, then spoke again with quiet weight. "What I want is a pact. You help me reclaim my music, and in return, I will teach you something you've never known." The crowd leaned forward, tangled in curiosity. Karen's mask of pride trembled, struggling to hold. "Humility," Robert continued, his gaze fixed on hers. "Respect for those who stand unseen but hold everything together. You thought to humiliate me, but the lesson is yours to learn. This night isn't about wagers, it's about redemption. The words hit harder than any demand for marriage could. The critic's eyes glistened, recognizing wisdom beyond music. The guests exchanged glances, some nodding with approval. They had expected a scandal, yet found a revelation. Robert's dignity turned the stage into something greater than spectacle, and Karen could feel her walls crumbling in front of them all. Her heart pounded, her pride clawing for escape. Yet something inside her bent under the weight of his mercy. He had every chance to ruin her, yet he refused. Instead, he offered a path she never imagined. The crowd watched, sensing the shift in her soul. Karen lowered her glass slowly, her voice unsteady. "You ask me to change, and you offer no change in return." Her words trembled, half defiance, half surrender. She felt the eyes of the room burn against her skin, and for the first time, she had no script to follow. Robert stood firm, unshaken, his silence carrying more than words. The choice was hers, yet the weight of it belonged to both. A pact of transformation, not humiliation, lay before her. The night demanded not shame, but rebirth, and Karen's heart quivered on the edge of decision. The ballroom seemed to lean closer, eager, restless. Would she mock him again, or step into the truth he offered? Karen's pride faltered, but her soul stirred. Something told her this was not just his second chance. It was hers too, if she dared to take it. Karen's chest rose and fell. Her breath caught between pride and surrender. She glanced at the crowd, then back at Robert's steady gaze. The arrogance that had shielded her now felt like a burden too heavy. Her lips trembled as she forced herself to speak. And what came out surprised even her. "I was wrong," she said, her voice fragile but clear. Gasps rippled across the room, sharp as breaking glass. Karen, the untouchable heiress, lowering her pride before them all. Her words cracked the marble silence into something softer. Even Robert's eyes flickered with quiet surprise. She turned to the staff, her gaze landing on Amelia first. "I treated you as shadows, as if you didn't exist. I mocked the very people who keep this world upright. I can't erase the cruelty, but I will not repeat it. From tonight, I promise to see you as you are." The staff, stunned, exchanged glances they never thought possible. Some held back tears, their dignity finally acknowledged. The room shifted, the air less heavy, more alive. Her apology was imperfect, but it was real, and that reality mattered more than any performance. Karen faced the guests next, her chin trembling but lifted. "You came here expecting my arrogance, and I gave you plenty. But tonight, I learned humility from the very man I tried to break. If I am to hold power, then it must be used differently. From now on, I will support those I once ignored." The critic nodded, a faint smile breaking his stern face. "Growth begins with truth," he murmured, almost to himself. The guests, once entertained by cruelty, now found themselves moved. They saw not humiliation, but a woman reshaped in real time. And for the first time, Karen's glow felt human. Robert watched her with a calm that steadied the room. Her words were not for show. He could sense the shift. She was stepping off her pedestal, brick by brick. The pact he had offered was no longer abstract. It was becoming flesh, fragile, but alive. Karen drew a deep breath, her voice firmer now. "I will use my wealth to fund education, music, and dignity, not to flaunt, but to rebuild, starting with him." She gestured to Robert, her pride reshaped into resolve. The crowd erupted, this time not in mockery, but approval. Amelia pressed her hands together, tears finally breaking free. The staff smiled softly, as if witnessing the impossible. Karen had bent, but she had not shattered. Her transformation was fragile, but it was real, and in that fragility lay her strength. Robert inclined his head, accepting her words with quiet grace. This was not the end of her journey, only the beginning. And as the applause rose again, softer, more genuine, the night carried a new kind of weight, one of hope. But the piano still waited, yearning for its final voice. Robert returned to the piano. The room hushed in reverence. The keys gleamed beneath the lights, waiting for his touch. He closed his eyes, letting silence settle like a prayer. Then, with a gentle breath, he began to play. The melody rose, fragile at first, then full of light. This was no display of skill or defiance. It was a gift. The notes carried sorrow, but turned it into something tender. Each phrase felt like forgiveness stitched into sound. It was music of wounds healing, of doors reopening, a song not for applause, but for the soul. The crowd listened as if they had never heard music before. Couples reached for each other's hands without realizing. Even Karen's eyes welled. Her pride dissolved into humility. The melody lifted hearts the way dawn lifts shadows. Hope poured into every corner of the ballroom. Robert played, as if he were speaking to those he had lost. The memory of his parents echoed in the rising chords. Pain turned to strength, sorrow turned to beauty. Every note felt like a bridge between past and future. And the crowd crossed it with him step by step. The critic bowed his head, overcome by the purity of it. "This is beyond music," he whispered to no one. "It is rebirth." The staff, once invisible, stood taller, their dignity reflected in sound. Robert was no longer alone at the keys. He carried them all. The melody swelled, brighter, higher, like a sunrise unfolding. It promised second chances to those who had fallen. It whispered that dignity could survive even the cruelest night. It taught that humility could heal what arrogance had broken. It was the sound of lives being rewritten. Karen pressed her hand to her chest, unable to hide her tears. The pact she had accepted now lived inside the music. It reshaped her heart note by note, chord by chord. She no longer heard a servant at the piano. She heard a master giving birth to grace. The final chords rang like bells across the marble floor. They hung in the air, shimmering, refusing to fade. The silence that followed was holy, untouchable. Then came the applause, not thunderous, but reverent, as if the crowd feared breaking what had just been born. Robert stood, bowing with a quiet humility. He had not played for victory, but for redemption. The music was not his alone. It belonged to them all. And in that shared silence, hope lingered like a flame. The night had been cruel, but it ended with light. Karen stepped forward, her head lowered, but her heart open. "Tonight, you gave us more than music," she whispered. "You gave us a second chance." The crowd nodded, their faces softened by truth. And Robert, smiling faintly, let the music speak for him. The final note still lingered in the air, long after Robert had stepped away from the piano. It wasn't just a melody, it was a promise, etched into the hearts of everyone who listened. A night born from cruelty had become a story of dignity, humility, and second chances. The kind of story that makes you question the masks people wear and the truths they hide. And maybe, just maybe, it left you wondering about your own hidden battles. Tell me, what did this story stir inside you? Did you feel the weight of Robert's pain or the tremor of Karen's surrender? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know how this tale touched you. If it moved you, let your voice join the others who have already felt the same, because stories like this are not just heard, they are lived through every reflection they awaken. On this channel, you'll find more stories just as emotional, filled with conflict, discovery, and unexpected turns. If this one held you until the end, I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next journey. There are many more tales waiting for you, each carrying its own storm and its own light. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next video. Until then.